Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. This week we're taking on a topic that I'm sure everyone has practiced at some level, but I'm also pretty sure not everyone has practiced enough, and that's engine failures. We've done a lot of shows on emergencies and other things. We've talked a little bit about this, but you as a DP who has been in the plane for a lot of simulated engine failures thought it was worth the time to talk about it one more time.
Yeah, I did. I was actually talking to an instructor yesterday. Actually, I was watching the instructor debrief a student, and he said to the student, he said, what's our number one goal today when we go and fly the airplane? And what he finally got to is our number one goal is to not die. Okay? So, after that, we want to have a good time. We want to be productive and all that good stuff. But, ultimately, we don't want to die. And, probably the mother of all systems failures that we can have in an airplane, short of a wing falling off where there's absolutely really nothing we can do about it, or the tail coming off. But the biggie is an engine failure. And we just compared notes. We compared the private pilot ACS with the commercial pilot ACS. And under emergency operations, there's an emergency approach and landing simulated, and that's for single-engine airplanes. And it is verbatim the same for a private pilot as it is for a commercial pilot. I would venture to say that most people, as they're going through their flight training, they're working on their private pilot certificate. They're going to work on this. Their instructor is going to say, okay, engine failure, what are we going to do? And they're going to go through their procedure and line up with a field or a road, or if you're lucky, an airport. And, you're going to go around out of it, and that's going to be the end of it. You'll do that over and over and over again until your instructor feels that you're competent, and you'll be evaluated on your private pilot check ride with this. And I would challenge all the listeners out there to say, how many of you, after you got your private pilot certificate, would go out and practice this? Say, okay, I'm at maybe 4,500 feet, and I'm going to say 1,000 feet above the ground is as low as I'm going to go, but boom, I just lost an engine. What am I going to do?
Well, Wally, I practiced it a lot after my private, but it was right before my commercial check ride. Right. Yeah, and so we go on to the commercial and we do it there, and then we kind of forget about it. And then maybe if you go on to get a CFI, hopefully you practiced it, working towards your CFI, because it's the biggie. This is the Super Bowl of emergencies. It really is. And I can remember being a young private student and remembering that if the engine quit, I knew we were going to start descending, right? You just you pick up on a few things, the principles of flight. And if the prop stops spinning, you're going to have to land somewhere. And I can remember coming back into hooks one time, and I said, well, how much distance do you need? Like you say find a field, and I'm saying, how big does that field have to be? Is what I'm thinking in my head, right?
Right.
And so we ultimately were just north of the field, and we were right over Tomball High School. For those in the local area will know what that is, but just picture a football field with the high school logo in the middle of it. And he goes, I think I could get us landed and stopped sideways on that field. It might hurt, but we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, we have this 7,000-foot runway we've been landing on, and you're going to land 150, maybe 180 feet with maybe the sidelines there.
Right.
It's not that much room.
Right.
Now, being a little bit smarter and knowledgeable, that's a soft, short, rough landing probably, but it's doable for sure.
I used to be a partner in a Bonanza several years ago, and one of my partners was very fond of saying, we would talk about, well, what if we had an engine failure? Because the engine that we had in the airplane was getting towards its end of its life or getting close to TBO, and we were trying to decide how we wanted to handle the engine. Anyway, and Tom used to always say, he says, well, first of all, I'm not going to fly this airplane in any kind of weather, and I'm not going to fly it at night. He says, I feel confident that the way I fly this airplane, that I will be able to land it anywhere. He said, now it might ruin my day, but it's not going to kill me. Yeah. I may go home and say, boy, today was a bad day, but I'm gonna live through it. And I think that's just using your example. It may hurt, but yeah, you could put the airplane down.
So let's break an engine failure into 3 parts today for the show. We're going to talk a little bit about the engine failure or the mock engine failure on a check ride, and some tips and tricks maybe from Wally, and some thoughts about what you should be thinking about or doing. And that really will account for both private and commercial. The ACSs are identical. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen differently when it really does happen. Not too long ago, I heard a gentleman around the flight school say, it's not a matter of if you're going to have an engine failure in a GA aircraft if you put more than 1,000 hours in one. It's when you're going to have an engine failure in a GA aircraft. So if that's really the case, what's going to change for all of us when it does really happen? Because it can't be as calm as a simulated one, for sure. And then we'll talk about some troubleshooting tips that may help you before it happens, right, before the engine really completely fails, and talk through a few scenarios that we've seen in the flight school world and that Wally has experienced in his real life that has made an engine, we'll say, sputter, give out a little bit, but not completely quit, and cause for an emergency landing all the way. So with that, before we start, lots of stuff on social media and whatnot. And recently I saw a meme. You've probably seen this meme before. And it's like, did you do this when you were a private student? And it's a picture of this big field, big general field area. And there's a white circle around this beautiful green pasture. And it says, my DP asked me to find a good place to land. And it's this field, which we would all say is great, but there's a 7,000-foot runway diagonally across just short of that field, right? Yeah. We are all so well taught in the check ride to find a field. I can remember my instructor saying, why not land in Navasota? It's 1,000 feet below us.
Right.
And I'm like, shucks, you got me again. We do it again. He goes, why not land in the Soaring Club? They have a really nice grass runway right over there about a mile away.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're learning to keep up with all that stuff. But how many times do they pick a field when they could have picked an airport with you, Wally?
It happens quite a bit. There's one of the airports I fly out of northeast of here, Cleveland, Texas. There's an airport community, Lake Waterwheel, that's just northeast of there. And I love to give engine failures over Lake Waterwheel. Now, granted, I mean, I spend a lot of time in airplanes looking out the window. So, I mean, I look at all the nice pools down there. I go, wow, that's a really nice pool. And wow, that there are actually houses around here that have 2 pools. I don't know if anybody knew that, but when you spend time looking out the window, they'll have a lap pool and a play pool. But anyway, that's I'm digressing here. But in defense of the student or the applicant, I do spend a lot of time looking out the window. So I learn what things look like, and I know that, hey, there's Soaring Club of Houston. I mean, it's a grass runway. Unless you're really on top of your game, sometimes it's hard to recognize that really is a runway, a grass runway. This Lake Waterwheel has a grass runway, and it's a little bit more obvious because all the houses have hangars, and it looks like a bunch of hangars. It looks like an airport with just a bunch of grass in the middle rather than an asphalt runway. So, but yeah, there are And again, depending on your altitude, you may not have a whole lot of time to to come up with different options. You may pick the thing that's straight ahead, and hindsight being 20/20, yeah, maybe to the right was a better option. But I get that, and that will come with experience just by looking out the window.
I think we told a story a long, long time ago. There's a lot of big roads around here, and a lot of big roads have to be built. So I think it was 20-something miles of 7-lane freeway that hadn't opened up yet, and your student wanted to land in the field or your applicant wanted to land in the field instead of the 7 lanes of freeway there.
Yeah.
I think I would have picked the freeway. And
Yeah.
I just got back from a long road trip to Florida, and somebody said, "Did you know Eisenhower made the road people build a straight mile every 5 miles? That was part of the interstate system, and it was so the planes could land." I did not know that. I
Wow.
had heard that a long, long time ago. But if you're in the U.S. and you drive for 5 miles on the interstate, one of those miles is an exact straight line so that they could land airplanes on them if they needed to.
Wow. And then for those of you who don't know, a mile is 5,280 feet, so that's a nice 5,000-foot runway.
There you go.
Yeah.
With hopefully no cars on it. You
Right.
wouldn't want to land on the cars. So
Right.
let's go through the check ride scenario, Wally. You know the student's nervous. You know the CFI's probably done this 20-plus times. You know, I jokingly say that for people that aren't pilots yet, the engine failure on a check ride is similar to parallel parking for driver's license test, right?
Yeah, that's a
it's
good
kind of
analogy.
it's kind of like that one big thing that we over practice in the real world. We hope we never have to parallel park ever again.
Right.
When we do, none of us remember how to do it, right? But on the check ride, it's that one big thing, right?
Yeah.
So we've practiced, and we've moved those cones closer and closer together when we're drivers. We try to pick a harder place when we're practicing with our CFI. Now they're with you. Obviously, the ACS is the expectations, but what are you really looking for in the performance of that applicant?
Well, what I'm looking for is that they set up the airplane in a situation to where I believe that they could put it down in an area and basically live through it. The ACS has some elements that you can look at. Establish, maintain best glide speed. But I guess, if you're sitting at your house and you got a bunch of friends over and you're having a Super Bowl party and it's 5 minutes before kickoff and all of a sudden your TV shuts down, probably your first thought is to push the power button on the TV or on the remote and start it back up. Okay? So that's what we're trying to do in an engine failure. If the engine fails, we want to start it up again. If you're driving down the interstate and your engine fails in your car, what do? You reach down to your key and you start it up. Probably hasn't happened to most of us in a long time with nice modern cars. But that's, once we determine that we have had an engine failure, most of you are going to have there's going to be a procedure in the POH. And in most of the small airplanes we fly, the first thing we'll say, we'll establish your best glide speed. And so probably around 65 knots, something like that. And at some point, pick a place to land. And again, this is a function of altitude. If I'm at 8,000 feet above the ground, I know I've got over 10 minutes. If I'm at 1,200 feet, I got a little over a minute, 90 seconds maybe. So, at 8,000 feet, I'm going to be much more inclined to try to get that engine restarted. And there's two elements to getting the engine restarted. The first one is fuel. Probably somewhere on there is something about a fuel selector, probably something about a mixture control, probably something about carburetor heat, probably something about maybe a primer in and locked if you're an airplane that has one, or you could say if you're in an airplane that has a carburetor heat. But all those have to do with fuel.
Well, and so to that point, CFIs that are out there listening, students that are out there listening, I really wish of course it seems obvious, but I wish my instructor would have taught me more of that than the procedure, right? Because I think knowing that, now that I fly a bunch of different airplanes and I'm in different planes, fuel pump, yes, some fuel pumps, some planes don't have fuel pumps. But now that I have 500 hours, of course I'm thinking fuel.
Yeah.
And I do a podcast with you who says that a lot. But I mean, if the engine were to stutter, I would think fuel. My eyes would jump to fuel flow.
Right.
My eyes would jump to fuel pressure. I would be thinking carb heat first. I'd be thinking fuel switches, whatever those are, on-offs, left, rights, whatever those might be, fuel pumps. I'd hit everything fuel and probably hit everything fuel twice before I moved on. I do think sometimes in the learning environment, we get caught up in this is the procedure. This is the ACS. Nowhere on the ACS does it say check all fuel items first.
Right.
Or is that a disservice to what the greater good is? I don't think so, because we're driven by checklists. But at the same time, having a deeper understanding of why the checklist is ordered the way it's ordered, I think is important.
Yeah. And so once you've done all your fuel things, well, after that, it's spark. We need three elements to start a fire. You need spark, you need fuel, and you need air. And at this point, we really can't do anything about the air, but you can do something about the spark, and that's make sure you did not hit that magneto switch and turn them off. Make sure you didn't shut the engine down using the key, which I guess could happen. I've never seen it, but that's a possibility. So after you try all this, again, it's a function of, well, how high up am I? If I'm now at 6,000 feet and I still have 8 minutes before I'm going to land, maybe if you're in a Cessna, maybe if you've got the fuel selector on both, man, I would move it to left or right. Maybe you've got water in the fuel, and maybe that water is just in the right tank. So maybe going to the left. I would do something differently. There's an old saying that says the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If the engine's not running, and I can't make it any worse, so I'm going to move that fuel selector to left or right. But again, so we've determined that we've got the fuel, we've got the spark. Now what? Well, if the engine does not quit at this point, I think most of us have watched a TV show or a movie where police were involved. I mean, what is the first thing that police do or military does if they're in a real bad situation? They're out somewhere and bad guys are shooting at them. They call for backup. All right, so
they scream for backup.
Yeah, they do. So at this point, let people know that you've got a problem, and we have multiple ways of doing that. Probably the easiest is to squawk 7700, because you're going to light up every radar screen that's got you and in range, and it's a generic emergency code, but they're going to know somebody's out there having a tough time. If you're already on with ATC, just pick up the mic and tell ATC what is going on. And again, if you're not on with ATC, if you're maybe out just tootling around by yourself in a practice area doing some maneuvers, go to 121.5. I would venture to say that a lot of people listening to this podcast either have a Garmin 530 or a Garmin 430. If you hold the button that moves your standby frequency to the active frequency, if you just push that button and hold it for about 3 seconds, 121.5 will automatically appear in the active frequency. So you can be dummy proof at this point. You don't even have to remember 121.5. And I've seen many people say 121.5 and they put in 121.05 or they put in 122.52. So in the moment of stress, the performance usually goes down a little bit. So just hold that button for about 3 seconds. And if you've never done it and you've got a 430 or 530, I would say next time you fly, just play with that.
So they do that. They've lined up, hopefully with the wind. They're thinking about configuring the plane for landing. Then you get to 1,000 feet. I guess you tell them, did a good job. We'll fly around there, right?
Yeah.
If we start transitioning to what happens in the real world, I know you would never do this in a scenario for a check ride, but if they're at 1,000 feet, what would you expect someone to do? And I always go back to, it sounds silly, maybe even cliche, but it's aviate, navigate, communicate, right? I mean, I think we gotta be in control of the aircraft.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. We don't want to be low and slow. We got to navigate, so we got to find that place to land. But we're probably not doing a bunch of fuel switching and all that. At 800 feet, we're down to not much time.
Right.
And probably not many options. So
right.
8,000 feet, we got 50 fields to choose from and probably 2 airports we're not looking at right there. Mm-hmm. The 800 feet, we're probably got two big bushes of trees, and maybe one good spot to land, and maybe a road with some power lines. We're running out of options.
Yeah.
So I got to navigate, and then if I have time, I got to call for help. I got to scream for help. I got to let somebody know.
Yeah.
I'm going down. I'm squawking 1,200 somewhere here to the west. Help me.
Yeah.
Bye. Yeah. That's about all you got time to do.
Yeah, and most airplanes will have a procedure for landing without power, and in this case, you've tried to restart the engine, it didn't work, and usually these checklists, the landing without power, whatever it might be called for your particular airplane, the philosophy now is it's not working, so let's shut everything off. Let's shut the fuel off. Let's bring the mixture back to cutoff. Let's
open the door
and crack the door, because it's possible that we could land and damage the actual fuselage so that the door is jammed shut, and that would be that could be a bad situation, especially if a fire were involved. So one thing you have to remember is, probably one of the last steps in that procedure is to turn the master switch off. And if you're in an airplane that has electric flaps, you got to remember to not turn that master switch off until the flaps are down. It doesn't really say it. Now, it's in sequence. It is in that sequence, but if you're in a Piper, that's one thing. You could shut the master switch off and still use the flaps. And then that brings to the question is, do we want to land with full flaps? What do we want to land with? Well, the example I use, we're in Houston, Texas, and one of our star pitchers is Justin Verlander, and I say to people, I said, okay, if you had to stand at home plate and be hit with a pitch, would you rather be hit with a pitch from Justin Verlander, or would you rather be hit with a pitch from me? And everybody always picks me. And I say, why do you pick me? And they said, well, it will hurt less because he can probably throw that ball a lot faster than you. And I go, exactly right. And that's exactly the same philosophy with landing with full flaps. We're going to land on an unimproved, we're probably going to land in a field that's probably going to be soft. The chances of the airplane flipping over are more so than our normal day of touch and goes out at the nice paved runway. So you want to be going slow. There's less energy to dispense. It's just going to hurt less. Touching down at 35 knots, going to be a lot better than touching down at 80 knots.
No doubt about that. Those people don't know that you pitched in college and probably pitched harder than him. I'm not just kidding.
Yeah.
You're going to throw one out of the window of a moving jet. It's going to hurt. But the all those things are the reality of what's going to happen in the real world if it happens. I guess what I would be most concerned about is my emotions. Like, how am I handling my emotions, right? There's really no way, no matter how much we talk about creating some stress and anxiety, there's no way to create enough of that. If you watch anything on YouTube, watch a couple people that are GoProing themselves. Their breathing changes drastically, right?
Yeah.
They go from humdrum, good old day to,
Yeah.
you know, they are panicking. There's some real stuff, and I don't know where I've heard this saying, but we're only going to be the best that we can be to what we've practiced.
Right.
And so if you don't practice, if you haven't practiced recently, you're not going to be any better than that best last practice run that you had, for sure.
Right. I took off one time in my 172. I was out just going to fly around, and I took off, and at about probably 800 feet, the engine coughed and sputtered. Never quite quit, but I just went into ultra, oh my gosh, I got to turn this thing around. And I was able to turn it around. I was at an uncontrolled airport, and winds were calm-ish, maybe, probably less than 5 knots. But I came in and landed, went to the end of the runway and did a run-up, did another run-up, did another run-up, did a high-speed taxi down the runway 2 or 3 times, and really was scratching my head as to what happened. And the only thing that I thought that could have happened, and I did not take care of this in the air, but I thought about on the ground that it could have been carburetor ice. It was, conditions were right for it. It was probably around 48 degrees Fahrenheit.
Nice humid Houston day.
Yeah, humid Houston day. And so I went ahead and I took off in the airplane and orbited around the airport, stayed real close, and never had another issue. But hindsight being 2020, I wish I would have gotten that carburetor heat switch on, and because that didn't even occur to me. All that occurred to me was turn around and land. So while it was a successful outcome, I mean, there's an example of a fairly experienced pilot not really doing the procedure the way I should have done it.
Well, we'll just assume you were close to the ground and didn't have a lot of time to do those procedures.
There you go.
But that's a good segue into the last part of really let's troubleshoot it before it happens, right? If we know we need to think, again, there's an ACS for the check rides. There's checklists for a reason. We're talking some real world things here that you might want to think about and learn. How would I troubleshoot those things? And if we know we need fuel and we know we need spark, we know we need air, we got to assume if we're in a plane moving forward, we're getting some air intake. So that's off the list. And we're going to look at those fuel items first. We talked through it. Carb ice is probably one that might sneak up and bite people, just like you said. I think a fuel switch getting kicked is very realistic, I think, in a Cessna. Passengers getting in, someone climbing over, it could easily be forgotten, right? We fly all the time. I've heard horror stories of these people that turned it to off, or if some of them have it off, both left, right, off. And there's enough fuel in those fuel lines to probably move a pretty good distance, right? Maybe even get airborne.
Yeah.
We got to make sure we follow the pre-flight checklist of the ground stuff.
Yeah.
Make sure those things get on. Same thing with the fuel's on-off switch. We wouldn't want to charge those lines and then turn that off.
Yeah, one thing I would talk to our listeners about is that, in a Piper where you're on left or right, sometimes on the before takeoff checklist it will say fuel fullest tank, and I'm never going to switch the fuel switch out at the end of the runway. If I've got 10 gallons less in the left side, which I have a Saratoga that has 51 gallons on each side, if I plan to take off on the right tank and I get out there and I realize I'm on the left tank and I have a little bit less than the left tank, I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to take off in that configuration, and I'm going to switch once I get in the air and get a little bit of air. Just because, when you switch from tank to tank, you're going to have some fuel in the lines. And I don't know how much is in there, but probably enough to get you down the runway and get you about 100 feet.
Yeah, you wouldn't want that to be air coming from that new tank or something else.
Right.
That would give you enough to maybe get airborne, and then you'd have a really bad situation. We just had no NTSB reports out yet, but a twin-engine plane took off from one of the big airports, and it made a real quick emergency landing, and it was, I think the first examination says might have had jet fuel instead of avgas. Well, that plane won't run on jet fuel, but will run on avgas. So whatever was in the lines or whatever came out of those tanks for a while was enough to get them about 500 feet in the air.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be in a twin 500 feet in the air when both engines quit, for sure. So real world, true time case study that says we could have the right fuel in those lines for enough to get to 500 feet and then no mas, right? And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that, for sure.
Right.
And we really didn't talk fuel contamination, but another one, make sure you sump your tanks, right? If you don't sump your tanks, you could put yourself in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to get fuel in a GA aircraft. If I can watch, I'm going to watch. If I can't watch, I'm going to sump. If they come back and put more fuel in it when I wasn't watching, I'm sumping again.
Yeah.
There's just no way I'm going to fly that plane.
Yeah, and I think a really good example is a lot of, especially this time of year, you're maybe walking out to the airplane, you got a plastic water bottle in your hand. When you get to that water bottle down where you got just a couple ounces of water in there, and then you reach up and you sump that, or reach down and sump the tank, take that fuel and pour it in the water bottle and shake it up and watch how quickly that water separates. It takes about just a few seconds.
Yeah.
And that water will separate. So, I had someone tell me recently, we just fueled, and I asked them if they were going to sump, and he says, oh no, the airplane's been flying all day. And I said, yeah, but we just fueled. How do we know we didn't just get 30 gallons of water?
Yeah.
And
fuel trucks have issues as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not all perfect.
Yeah.
Might not be Jet A, but it might be water. Could be something else.
And Jet A will separate just as well. I mean, there's a very distinct difference. That's why our avgas is blue in tint, and Jet A is kind of more of a yellow.
Good stuff. Other things we might do to troubleshoot the fuel system, obviously check to make sure the primer's in. Recently heard of a primer getting back to our flight line and not being locked in. That's a very, very possible dangerous situation. If that backs out a little bit more, the engine will run very rough and probably scare a lot of people. And we got to make sure we slowly put that thing back in if that was the case in flight. Right. We talked fuel switches. We talked carb heat. If we exhaust everything that's fuel related and we didn't let it really starve of fuel, we didn't run out of fuel, then it's the electrical stuff. Magnetos are obvious. Lots of times that I've been around a lot of GA aircraft the last 6 years now. A magneto can feel like an engine's about to stop. If you lose a magneto at 2,300 RPMs, it can be pretty violent. Lose a cylinder at 2,300 RPMs would feel real violent.
Yes.
And the thing I think about is students soloing and how are they going to react and what are you really prepared for at 15, 20 hours? The one thing when I have the chance to talk about it, the question is, we want to aviate first. And we talk about it all the time, but the practicality of aviating to me in that case is, are you generating enough thrust to maintain altitude? Because if you're doing that to me changes the whole ball game of what my decision is going to be. I'm not maybe going to drive it into some power lines at the end of a good-looking field because I got a rough-running engine if I can maintain altitude.
Right.
And I don't know if I'll have the wherewithal, Wally, when it happens to me if I lose a cylinder, but I want to say I'm going to try to adjust the throttle to a point where it's not as rough as it is at its roughest. But if I can maintain altitude at some other power setting, I'm not just going to down it in a field somewhere, right?
Right.
If that is the case, then I'm going to go through everything else we've been talking about, right? If I can maintain altitude, I'm going to pitch for 65. I'm going to maintain better altitude, you would hope and think.
Right.
And then I'm going to give myself some buffer there, and then I'm going to go through the rest of my stuff. But there's a few situations where you might have a really unbalanced engine and it feel like the world's coming to an end.
Yeah.
But it's not going to necessarily fall apart. And you if you can get through that first moment of fear, I think it's interesting the options that do present themselves to you at that point.
Yeah.
Then at that point, you've troubleshot all that stuff. I know most planes checklists have a restart the engine. They'll try if it's gone completely stopped, it's not windmilling anymore. You can do some things to try to restart the engine. I remember playing or mimicking of doing that when I was on my check ride before I made the landing at an airport, and we actually did a full landing, stop, taxi back. It was a interesting experience and a good one, but one that I had practiced a few times the day before, so I was ready for it. Anything else to add to the troubleshooting part of that conversation that you might be able to do before the engine fails? I mean, we're talking anything.
I don't think so.
All right. So wasn't too long ago, I got a phone call from a friend of ours that said I end every show incorrect with my verb usage and my adjective usage. So I'm not allowed to say fly safe today. I have to say fly safely today. So as always, stay behind the prop and fly safely.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.